In Gomel, when the Ura column arrived there, it was relatively quiet. German aviation had not yet crushed it. A couple of times a day there were raids. 1 or 2 airplanes would arrive, fire a few machine gun bursts from a high altitude and disappear. There were air defense installations around the city and in the city itself, and every German raid was met with a hurricane fire of anti-aircraft guns. The day before, the anti-aircraft guns shot down 1 Messerschmitt. The road of 250 kilometers from Slutsk to Gomel we passed in one day and mail without any trouble. On the way we lost only 2 cars. Lashkevich, who knew these areas well, led the column along small country roads, avoiding the main streams of retreat. There were many troops at Rikitsa and in Gomel, but here there was already relative order and organization. This was especially noticeable after all the chaos and panic through which the column had passed from the border to the Dnieper. The bridges in Rikitsa were well guarded, and the crossing of all the retreating units and civilian refugees was perfectly organized. In Gomel itself there was a hurried work on the organization of defense on the Dnieper line. Here we learned that Marshal Timoshenko was in charge of this area and several armies were being pulled here. I myself was assigned to the post of Chief of Staff of the 14th Section of Military Field Construction, the so-called VPS. The task of such WPS was, taking advantage of the slowdown of the German offensive on the approaches to the Dnieper, to create a temporary strip of fortifications, strongholds for the line of defense, on the left bank. It was time to say goodbye to all those with whom I had travelled from Vysoky to Gomel. I found General Pizarev's apartment. He was very pleased that the superiors appreciated the leadership of the retreat of our entire organization, which led to the fact that more than 65% of the roster at the beginning of the campaign reached Gomel. Of course, I pointed out that my aides on the march, like Lyashkevich, Upali, Lieutenant Borisov, and a few others, were at the proper height and contributed greatly to the success of my mission, the general said, shaking my hand in farewell. Lyashkevich, who had been assigned to the headquarters of the 21st Army, wished me success. I hope that somehow here or elsewhere, but the Germans will be stopped, he said not particularly confidently. I received instructions and a whole folder of drawings of typical devices of anti-tank ditches, forest blockages, machine gun nests, trenches, etc. The centre of the station was in the small town of Checharsk, north of Gomel. I was instructed to report to the head of the station the next day. Borisov, Shmatko, for some reason Junior Lieutenant Suvorov from the Polbat, and several other men from the department were also assigned there. I washed, cleaned, changed my clothes and found a working barbershop in town to get a haircut and shave. I had to wait quite a long time. Finally I sat down in a chair and fell into the hands of a female barber. The woman was not old, about 35 years old, clearly of the gypsy type. She worked skillfully, pushing her large breasts, tightly encased in a white overalls, over me. She seemed to do it on purpose. At any rate, every time she touched me like that, she looked into my eyes and winked with her black, mischievous gypsy eyes. "Are you a gypsy?" "I look like one." "Romina the gypsy, I'm a tabor." "A free one." "Would you like a fortune-telling, Captain?" "Give me a chervanate." "I'll tell you the whole truth." "Give me your right hand, good boy." "Come on, don't be afraid." "I won't lie, I'll look here." She took my hand firmly, began to examine the palm and suddenly pressed it to her breast. "Don't be frightened, honey, it's beautiful. It is necessary so that the blood warms up in you. It will be easier to know what awaits you." My blood was really starting to heat up from that touch, and I squeezed her palm lightly. "Don't be spoiled, my dear, don't be spoiled," laughed the gypsy woman, looking closely into my eyes. "You see, she has warmed up the blood, or else you fell asleep. How can such a sleepy man guess? You can't see the truth in a sleepy man. You have a big life ahead of you. You'll live long, you'll be happy. You'll shed blood, but you'll live. A long road ahead, many versts you'll have to travel. Roads, rivers, seas, oceans you'll cross. You'll have a lot of grief, but you'll be happy. You'll go through fire, but you won't be scorched, you'll bleed, but you'll live. All will be well with you. Don't be afraid of the bullet. It's not cast for you, good boy. Give me a dime for my truth." I paid for the haircut and gave her another 2 tens. Thank you, beautiful. Maybe I'll really survive this case, you will. Truth be told. You were born lucky. Walk healthy, good for you. I would have slept with you, but there is no time, and she laughed happily. I settled down for the night in one of the rooms of a large house occupied by this newborn organization, the UPU. Several rooms were literally crammed with radios of various brands, styles and types, even many homemade ones. One of the staff workers, in response to my question as to why these receivers were here, said these are all requisitioned and surrendered by the population. There was a lot of anti-Soviet and pro-fascist propaganda in the air on all kinds of waves, so there was an order to surrender all the receivers. It is forbidden to receive and use radio receivers, even to receive our stations. Under the guise of listening to Moscow, they are quietly switching to Warsaw, Katowice, Berlin and similar stations. Are you, Captain? A member of the party? No. Why so? Nothing. If a member of the party by permission of the Commissar, some listen. These two receivers here are perfectly all right. Have you been listening yourself? Why? I'm not a party member. They won't give me permission anyway. And without permission it's very dangerous. And what's there to listen to anti-Soviet talk? They probably don't broadcast anything interesting anyway, and the political leadership will tell us what we need to know. There are even headphones on the box, so we can listen without noise. Well, have a rest, Captain. You have an early start tomorrow. Good night, and he left. I settled down on the torn and tattered sofa, and by the light of a dim bulb, began to look through the drawings and instructions I had received earlier. I was alone. All my colleague and fellow retreatants, who were to go with me to Chechkarsk tomorrow, had scattered around the city. Borisov had relatives here in Gomel, others had found themselves cheerful acquaintances, and I began to look through the materials handed over to me. There was nothing particularly interesting. The drawings, schemes, instructions and rules for the construction of these temporary fortifications were dated as early as 1934, and many things, especially the instructions on the methods of work in populated areas, clearly belonged to the peaceful, not to the military situation. Putting all this aside, I began to continue the letter to my wife, trying to describe our escape in careful tones. One could assume that before the letter reached my wife's hands, it would be read. Now that we were in the rear, and I had received a new assignment, I began to feel a great change in my position. Rarely did anyone call me engineer or even engineer, captain now, but simply captain. I sat and thought about this new essence of my rank. Commanding an army of thousands of workers in the construction of a power plant was perhaps easier than commanding a platoon of infantry. There was no responsibility for the life of a man, and here this responsibility for the life of every soldier. What my role would be in this war, and who I would command, I did not know, but I understood well that I was a commander and I would have to command. I had always been confident in myself, in my capabilities, knowledge and in my administrative ability to resolve issues on a construction site or in the engineering department, but here I knew nothing, and I did not know myself, what I could and what I was not capable of. And it scared me. There, in Kiev or even in Cheremka, my mistake threatened to punish me and only me, and in these new conditions my mistake can cause the death of dozens of people. I wrote for a long time. The letter turned out a little confused, unclear, as well as my mood. Something terrible was ahead of me, terrible because it was unknown, and not in harmony with the whole life understanding. War, mass murder, destruction, annihilation. ... Goodbye, my dear. It seems to me that I can't say goodbye. Once upon a time, during the end of the War of 14 and the beginning of the Revolution, I remember my mother pressing me to her side and saying, "I am so glad that you are still small, that you will not have to be a participant in this horror. When you grow up, then all wars and revolutions will no longer be possible. I am sure of it, and I thank God that all this is happening now, and not later, when you will be an adult." Wrong, Mum. Wrong, Mum. The air raid sirens wailed. I went to the window and opened it. The whole sky was riddled with searchlights. They were darting across the sky, across the clouds, looking for German airplanes flying somewhere. A little bit was heard the murmur of propellers, then hushed. Blue rays slid in the sky for a few more minutes, and then one by one they went out. Yes, my mother was wrong. We must end this. What does the coming day hold in store for me? I'm sending this letter to our Kiev address, as I think your tour is interrupted. Goodbye. I sealed the letter. Then I went to the receiver. We can listen to no noise. And I plugged in my headphones. Carefully twisting the tuning knob and looking at the doors, I went through the range. I heard different voices, then in German, then in Polish music. Again, someone shouted in German. Then I heard Russian speech, obviously Moscow. The announcer spoke about the levelling of the front, about the elimination of large enemy formations north of Lvov. Then the orchestra played Polushko Pole, and suddenly murderer, paranoid, rabid dog, bandit and unprincipled terrorist in pure Russian, calmly and clearly spoke someone. I cleaned up the tuning. What are you fighting for? Look back and think about what you are going to defend at the cost of your blood, your life. Defend who? Those who made you slaves, the communists, the Jews. Quickly pulling out my headphones, I turned the tuning to Moscow. Someone entered the next room. A pleasant female voice sang out, "You're a girl's share." A girl's share. Leaning back in my chair and covering my eyes, I pretended to enjoy the singing. Are you listening to the radio? The major who was processing my paperwork at the UPU office today walked in. Look, be careful with that. You can catch such fascist propaganda. They're all over the airwaves right now. Good night, I'm off to bed. After waiting a few minutes, I put my headphones back on and returned to the same spot on the tuning scale. 5 million Ukrainians in 1932-33. And the other nationalities? Bashkirs, Tatars, Uzbeks, Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians. How many hundreds of thousands of them have now perished or are perishing with you, Russian people, in the concentration camps of Siberia? And it is here, on the fields of Ukraine and Belarus, that you are going to die, to block the way with your bodies to the armies of the great Germany, coming to save you and your families from the rabid monster Joseph Dzugashvili and the Judeo-communist gang of bandits in the Kremlin. I even felt hot. For the first time in my life I heard such words and expressions about Stalin. I got up, went into another room, then into a third. Everything was quiet, and there was no one in the house. I went back to the receiver again. Come over to us, and we'll all be together once and for all. A door slammed somewhere. I instantly turned the tuning, turned off the receiver, and still wet with sweat and excitement, lay down on my couch. A whole group of commanders came in and began to settle in for the night. Early in the morning, the whole group gathered, received a March ration, and went to Chechyansk in a 3-ton truck. We drove along the river Soch, through villages. It was quiet and calm, even did not believe that it was war. Peasants were quietly working in the fields, in the vegetable gardens near their huts. Only almost no young men could be seen, all women and teenagers, and old men. In one village we stopped, bought milk and fresh bread. The collective farm authorities allowed us. There was no transport to take us to the reception center, so use it, comrade commanders. By noon we arrived in Chechyansk. The chief of the site, Major Titov, familiarized me with the planned work, with the working conditions and my duties as chief of staff. On the outlined on the map 3 Verska boundaries, taking into account local conditions, it was necessary to create a line of defense. Mainly an anti-tank ditch in the areas of possible crossing of the Dnieper by the Germans. It was mainly supposed to create anti-tank ditches in open places and forest blockages in forest areas. The LPF had to mobilize the local population to carry out the work. Kolkhozes and state farms provided labor, tools for the works, and the necessary transport, or rather horses. There were 39 servicemen in VPS 14, and this included the command, technical staff, and guards. Do you, Major, believe you can do this job in the time frame expected of us with the forces we have? I asked, after half an hour of familiarizing myself with the plans and assignments. No, but strive for it we must. Besides, it is better to be here than on the right bank, replied Titov, with frank cynicism. In practice, of course, it turned out to be absolute nonsense. Several thousand peasants, most of them women, were rounded up and started to work. The peasants worked only for show and only when one of the bosses was nearby, or else they just stood leaning on their shovels and judged, looking up at the sky. Soon a German airplane appeared and, flying at high altitude, gave a couple of short machine gun bursts. The whole mass of women, with squeals and screams, scattered, throwing their tools on the run. It was impossible to collect them again. They hid in groves, ravines, ran back to the village. Neither the village authorities nor the staff of the UPU could do anything about it. For several days in a row, I spent time in the saddle, riding along the line or to the collective farms directorates to organize the work somehow. Nothing worked. Those who were obliged to provide labor and see to the smooth running of the work, the kolkhoz and village bosses, clearly did not want to do it, and even the local party members only swore and spread their hands. Mothers of their kavinka. What can be done with these women? As soon as they see a sign, they immediately show themselves, and then you have to search all over the village for them all day long, the chairman of the village council told me. How can you do such a job? It was decided to move the headquarters of VPS 14 closer to the line of work, to the large village of Chevernia on the low bank of the Dnieper, almost against Zhlobin. In this whole area, from Gomel and up the Dnieper to Baikov, the Germans were not advancing, and even their aviation did not cause much trouble. I and 4 other workers of the headquarters settled down to have lunch in the house of the railroader Tarasenko, a very nice and cordial, welcoming family. The main attraction there was, of course, Shura, the eldest daughter, a medical student from Smolensk, sweet, cheerful, giggly and singing. She entertained everyone, flirted with everyone a little, played the guitar, sang and brought a special spirit of vigor and fun to these dinners. And her mother, Tarasenko's aunt, as everyone called her, was a cook. Tarasenko himself was seldom at home. He worked at Zhlobin station as a duty supervisor. And what are you sitting here for, Shura? You need to take your mother and children and evacuate farther to the rear. It's dangerous here. The Germans can cross the Dnieper every day. Then there will be panic. There is still time, I told Shura. Listen to my advice, or there may be all sorts of trouble. I know it, Comrade Pali, I know it well, but what to do? Mother doesn't want to leave here. She was born here, all her relatives, sisters, brothers are here. Dad's a local too. Where can we go? If we leave, their weight will be lost. Everything they've gathered all their lives, they and their parents before that. They won't leave their home, their garden, their orchard. And I won't leave them here alone with the younger ones. That's the way it will be. And maybe they won't let the Germans on this side. What do you think between you and me, Shura? I think the Germans will cross the Dnieper when they want to. Our side is not yet ready to retaliate. They will be here, and soon, well, that's a bit scary. But then again, the others will stay, won't they? Everybody thinks so. The Germans won't come forever. And someone has to sow bread and plant potatoes even under the Germans. What's there to think about it? It'll happen somehow. One evening we were urgently summoned to the village council. The whole top brass of the village was gathered in the village council. The secretary of the party committee, aka the head of the civil defense squad, said, comrades commanders, we have a report that somewhere near our village operates a group of spies saboteurs. We want to make a night raid and ask for help. This was nothing new. During the few days of the OPF's stay in Chevernia, this was repeated almost every night. The whole front line was plagued by spynomania. Every night someone was caught, arrested, shot. Everywhere were seen signalers, saboteurs sent to the rear, spies, scouts, provocateurs. A couple of days ago, a civil defense squad headed by its chief mistook the sparks flying out of the chimney of a local resident, Uncle Korch, the collective farm stableman, for an alarm system. They burst into the house with nagans and rifles, frightened Korch himself and his entire family, who were peacefully dining at the table. They questioned the unhappy stableman for a long time as to why, they said, the sparks were flying not constantly, but at intervals. And when Korch's wife tearfully proved that it depended on the number of times she had climbed into the furnace with a tack, the defense men calmed down only when she showed them this dependence between the movement of the tack in the furnace full of burning heads and the sheaf of sparks flying out of the chimney. But on this night it turned out to be more interesting. According to 2 Komsomol members patrolling the west end of the neighborhood, they saw 3 or 4 men behind the school on the road, and when the Komsomol members called out to them, they ran off into the honeysuckle. The school, a long 1-story building, stood on a hill behind the village, quite separate, by the road leading to the forest, along which anti-tank ditches were dug and machine gun nests were set up. It was decided to check the school first of all. The whole group of hunters, 20 or even more people, came out of the village and in absolute darkness, in a wide chain, began to approach the school. Stop. "Look, Comrade Captain, look," whispered the chairman of the village council, walking beside me, a rather young and energetic man whom I had met more than once on UPF business. "Look at the window of the left side. There. Again." A dim beam of light, as from a pocket flashlight with a weak battery, made 2 circular motions, went out, and a second later repeated the same motion, went out again, and quite clearly made some sort of signal in Morse code. 2 short and then 3 long flashes, and a few seconds later someone there in the dark school building repeated the signal 2 dots, 3 dashes. Wow, this is no joke. Pass it down the chain, carefully cordon off the entire school. I took out my gun and put a bullet in the barrel. But apparently not everyone got the warning to be careful. A dog barked, and someone in the dark shouted loudly at it, "Sit, skazena. Your mother's sick." Everyone ran towards the school, trying to surround her, but not in time. Somewhere a door slammed and there was a stomping of feet on the plank flooring, and at once they started shooting from several sides. I saw 2 shadows dashing into the tall, ripe hay, and I sent a few bullets in that direction myself. All began to fumble about in the honeysuckle field, but in the excitement trampled and crumpled it over a large area and lost all trace of those in the school. They examined the school with the lanterns brought from the village council. They found only a cigarette butt Bellamorcanol and some burnt matches. But the fact remained someone was giving signals to someone. After fruitless searches they returned to the village council excited, agitated and worried. Spionomania had turned from mania into reality. They sat around the long table in the chairman's office and began to discuss the event. "Who knows Morse code?" I asked. "I do," replied one of the participants. "Have you memorized the signal?" "Yes. 2 dots and 3 dashes, that's 2. So what does 2 mean? What did he mean to convey?" Everyone started making guesses and assumptions. Some, after the shooting near the school, got busy cleaning their guns. I, too, took my TT out of its holster, removed the clip and accidentally, forgetting the rules of gun handling, pulled the trigger. A shot rang out. 1 cartridge was in the muzzle. The bullet hit the ceiling obliquely, knocking off a decent piece of plaster. Everyone looked at me in silence, and I blushed, very stupidly. My fault, I forgot the bullet in the barrel. "Well, the captain's gone rogue, forgetting it. He could have shot us. You can see that you're not a builder, an engineer. You should know your weapons, or you'll get into trouble." These remarks and obvious mockery, evident in the looks and sneers of everyone in the room, were very unpleasant. The situation was saved by a messenger from the headquarters of the UPRPF Comrade Major Titov and you, Captain Pali. "But the order came from Gomel for you both to arrive there in the morning," he said. Titov and I, quickly bidding farewell to our colleagues on the night adventure, went to the headquarters. Shmatko was on duty at headquarters. He reported, "Ordered you, Comrade Major, together with Captain Pali, immediately go to Gomel and report to Colonel Fektistov at the headquarters of the district command. The order to leave immediately. I have already sent for a chauffeur." After a quick cup of tea, we left, taking 3 soldiers with us for protection. We arrived in Gomel at dawn and immediately went to look for the colonel who had summoned us. It was a tired, with eyes red from a sleepless night, nervous and somewhat frazzled, thin and small man. "That's it, comrades. Your OPU has given the order of life. There is no such thing anymore, disbanded. Since July 2nd, the whole front from Bessarabia to the Baltic has been divided into 3 sections: the northwestern under Marshal Voroshilov, the western under Marshal Timoshenko, and the southwestern, where Marshal Budyonny is in command. By order of Comrade Timoshenko, our entire section is being reformed. We must prepare for defense on the Dnieper from Mogilev to Novobelitsa." Titov was ordered to report to the headquarters of the commander of the 117th Infantry Division, located near Baikov, and I, promoted to the rank of engineer major, was appointed commander of a sapper engineering battalion in the 114th Infantry Regiment of the 162nd Division of the Separate Corps of Colonel General Petrovsky. In the order for the 21st Army, among other things, it was said about extraordinary production in the rank of Engineer Major P.N. Palia, due to the submission of Major General Puzyrev, head of the engineering forces of the Western Group. Handing me the order of production, Fektistov grinned. "Are you a relative of this General Puzyrev?" It was unexpected, but also pleasantly tickled my ego major. Puzyrev rewarded me for my activities during the escape, it was clear. Titov looked at me a little skeptically and quipped, "I only advise the newly promoted major to learn how to wield a weapon and not to shoot at his own. Besides, it's not the OPF with shovels and pickaxes. The situation on the front line is unenviable. In any case, I'll pay you back." All other servicemen of our section VPS 14, totaling 37 men, were enrolled in my battalion. We had breakfast in the commander's canteen and drove back to Chevernya. The liquidation of our VPS here, in Chevernya, caused indignation among local workers. How many crops have been ruined, how much land has been hacked up, how much forest has been used up, and all for nothing. What place do these chiefs think with? Anyway, the OPU was liquidated the same evening. I went to Tarasenko's house to say goodbye. Shura was not at home. Tarasenko's aunt sobbed, even cried a little, wished her happiness and promised, if Shura came home early, to send her to the headquarters to say goodbye. During the whole time of our stay in Chevernya, Titov and I lived in a room of a cottage belonging to the secretary and typist of the village council, a brash and insolent woman of about 30, called Klava. Titov quickly established close relations with this Klava and usually slept in her room. At Klava's house lived her relative, Zosia, a pretty young woman. She did all the housework, and Klava did her chores like a servant. This Zosia, according to Klava's stories, was married and lived in Bialystok. Zosia is Polish. Her husband was arrested for counter-revolution. He was a harsh man, and sent to Siberia, and she came to me here because she couldn't live there in Bialystok. So she lives with me. I feel sorry for her. She's my third cousin. She was a little touched when the NKVD took her Kazik away. She misses him, grieves, cries and prays to God. But she's all right, a hard worker, quiet, unrequited, like a little girl. That last evening in Chetvin, Titov and Klava got drunk and went to Klava's room to say goodbye, and I sat on a bench behind the house in the garden, still experiencing a new assignment in the combat unit and my majorcy. I dozed off and woke up from the fact that a woman was sitting next to me and, embracing me with her arm, pressed closely against me. It was Zosia. She snuggled up to me and whispered something in Polish, often repeating Kaziu, Kochani, Kaziu. I embraced her and drew her to me. This woman took me for her obviously very beloved husband, whom she missed. But I felt ashamed of myself. I moved away from Zosia and, taking her by the shoulders, said Zosia, "Wake up, I'm not Kazik, come to your senses." She opened her eyes wide, jumped to her feet, cried and ran into the house. In the morning our whole group, 37 men, under my command, loaded their belongings on a 3-ton Zis to go to Zhlobin, where our 114th Rifle Regiment was now located. Zosia beckoned me from the corner of the house and I approached. Zosia looked at me with her blue, completely childlike eyes and said in a low voice, "Bardzo dziękuję," pain and something else I didn't understand. She hung a small image on a silk cord around my neck and added, not quite confidently in Russian, "Thank you, mister." Zhlobin was packed with troops. There were more soldiers in the town than inhabitants, all the premises, all the houses, schools, hospitals, even barns and warehouses. Everything was filled with military men. Without much difficulty we found the regimental headquarters. For the headquarters was requisitioned on the outskirts of the city a house of some Jew, a city clerk, and his whole family lived in a barn. Colonel Volkov, the regiment commander, did not show much enthusiasm, meeting his new commander of the Sapper battalion. He looked through all the documents, looking at me skeptically. "Too bad you're not a construction worker. This isn't a logistics job, it's a front-line job. Your battalion serves the entire division and is only administratively subordinate to me. It won't be easy for you. True, there are a couple of good combat commanders in the battalion. but the rank-and-file crap. All kinds of rabble, construction workers, Asians, Uzbeks, and reserve soldiers who have already forgotten which end of the rifle shoots. He called the regimental chief of staff and the clerk, and they gave me all the data about the battalion, its composition, equipment, armament, etc. The battalion was far from being manned. 3 companies and 2 platoons of rifle guards, according to the schedule, should have 780 people, counting commanders, and there were only 432 and 37 arrived with me. With equipment and armament was even worse. The battalion, under the direction of one of the company commanders, on the instructions of the division headquarters, dug trenches and erected various fortifications around Zhlobin in order to increase its defence from the direction of Bobruisk, which was already in the hands of the Germans. The left flank of this defence rested on the Dnieper, below Zhlobin, and the right flank was adjacent to the positions occupied by another division, to the north of the town. Until July 8th, my battalion, with the help of the mobilised population of Zhlobin and several neighbouring villages, feverishly built fortifications, dug trenches, passages, arranged artillery positions and machine gun nests. I established good relations with the battalion commanders, though this was helped by the fact that I distributed all the personnel who had arrived with me, with whom I had worked back in Cheremka, and then in the VPS, by companies, and appointed Borisov as commander of the Rifle Guard. The Germans almost did not bother. Occasionally, and for some reason only in the afternoon, appeared 2 or 3 Messerschmitt, lazily bombarded the entire construction line and flew away. Divisional reconnaissance found that the Germans in Bobruisk are few in number. There they have a dozen tanks, mostly light, but the entire city is well guarded and all around the perimeter installed a lot of artillery. There were almost no casualties or losses from these sporadic German raids. There were 10 to 12 people killed in the whole section, and that was more of the mobilized. This led to the fact that the population became very reluctant to go out to work, to hide, to go to the left bank, especially the urban, mostly Jewish, population. These completely disappeared. On July 8th, the German Air Force swooped down in the morning, dispersed all the civilian workers, and forced a halt to work along the entire line. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, German tanks attacked the defenders of Zhlobin for the first time. There were only 5 tanks. It was not a penetrating attack, but perhaps a trial, a test, a probing. All 5 tanks at high speed raced along the line of defence and bombarded it with machine gun and artillery fire. The suddenness of the air raid and tank attack caused a significant number of casualties there. There were many killed and even more wounded. All regimental commanders and chiefs of staff were urgently summoned to division headquarters. The result of the meeting had an immediate impact. The demolition work, on the scale as it had been carried out so far, it was decided to stop. Today's aggression of the Germans was taken as a kind of warning that in the next few days the Germans would attack the position for real. The units were brought into the trenches, whether completed or not, and during the night they set up artillery and anti-tank defences. I, along with other combatants, was summoned to the regimental headquarters by Colonel Volkov. Here's what, Major. You occupy the defence on the extreme left flank to the shore. On your right will be the 1st Battalion Comrade Colonel. I have only 2 platoons of soldiers, the rest, are just labourers with shovels. There are 5 machine guns for the whole battalion, and only 1 platoon of guards has machine guns. How can you can? The colonel interrupted me. When you tell me how and where to dig the earth, I may listen to you, but now you listen to me and do immediately what I tell you. Is that clear, quite clear, Comrade Colonel? Only I hope you remember that I am not a major in the line service, but an engineer. I have neither experience nor knowledge of how to command in combat conditions, I replied, probably poorly concealing my fear of the sudden transition from the position of an engineer to the position of a combat commander in a forward position. I know that too. Your battalion will be out of position in 2 or 3 days and moved to another place to the ground to dig, but until I get replenishment of builders, I am forced to fill these 350 metres of the battalion. I put you on the very left edge, to the bank of the Dnieper, on the right the best part of the regiment, the 1st Battalion. I very much hope that by the time it gets hot, instead of you Lopatniks, I can already have soldiers in this place. You have some good commanders after all, and your Borisov seems to be a fighting guy. And listen carefully to your staff Sergeant Sestrika. What's his name? Zotov, this is a real soldier, knowledgeable and experienced. At the end of the conversation, Volkov reminded me whatever happened, do not leave the position without orders. I will personally shoot anyone who violates the oath, including you. From that day, the defense of Zhlobin began, and my battalion of shovelers, never replaced by soldiers, stayed on this line of 350 meters until the end, and I turned into a soldier in a short period of time. Now the Germans were no longer limited to rare air raids. The positions around Zhlobin were shelled daily and several times a day by artillery, both field artillery, from a distance of 2 to 3 kilometers, and long-range artillery. The Germans moved their advanced units and entrenched themselves. In some cases, the distance between the opponents was reduced to a kilometer. The tactics of the Germans were not quite clear. They did not make decisive attacks, but all the time disturbed along the entire perimeter of the defense by small surprise raids, keeping the entire defense in suspense. Sometimes it was a combined attack of light tanks and attack aircraft. Sometimes behind the tanks appeared chains of infantry, but they rarely came close, and at the first response of the defense artillery and machine gun fire from the trenches rolled back. It all looked like rehearsals, preparation, probing. Nervous tension was increasing every day. Everyone realized that at any moment such a small-scale diversion could turn into a decisive blow. We, the defenders of Zhlobin, found ourselves between two lines of fire. In front were the Germans. Often throughout the day it was impossible to come out of hiding. German snipers opened fire immediately. Behind, on all the outskirts of Zhlobin and near the Dnieper, there were rear outposts or barriers, and some called them Meklis's men. They shot anyone who did not have special permission to leave the front line, and sometimes even those who failed to present such permission in time. Going to the rear was just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than sitting in a trench on the front line. Even the wounded were checked and examined. On the central section of the defense there were units with a large percentage of so-called Asians, i.e., Uzbeks, Tajiks, Kazakhs. They did not understand well what was going on, did not speak Russian well, and did not want to fight. When the next German attack began, they fell to the bottom of the trench, and it was almost impossible to force them to take combat positions. There were already cases when commanders used their weapons against cowards and traitors. Several were shot there in the trench. After these cases, the number of wounded greatly increased, and most with wounds in the arm or leg. An absolutely unbelievable story came to light. The Asians would put a pilot's cap on their arm or leg and put it out as a target for German snipers. This naive tactic was very soon unravelled, and Meklis's men began to shoot all those wounded in this way, without interrogation, and immediately, searching for them even among others on ambulances or wagons, evacuating the wounded to the rear. They shot them immediately, on the road, so that everyone could see them for the sake of publicity. It helped. Wounded in the hand or foot almost disappeared. The most remarkable figure in my battalion was Sergeant Prokhor Ignatievich Zotov, but his name was rarely known or remembered. For everyone he was Sergeant Sestrichka. This strange nickname, completely inappropriate to the appearance of a large, strong, red-haired and outwardly rude professional soldier, stuck to him because of his habit of saying on any occasion, "My dear sister." He was a staff sergeant, and when I, on the first day of my arrival, ordered him to call together the entire battalion command staff, he stunned me with an unexpected phrase: "There is to call together the command staff, my dear sister, Comrade Major." And, turning to the duty messenger, in turn ordered, "Hey, Sidorchuk, wipe your snot, my dear sister, call all the commanders to the headquarters. Combat, my dear sister, has arrived. Come on, bring your cavalry. At once." Then I was told that when Marshal Timoshenko was here, and passing through the works, asked the sergeant what his name was, as if he blurted out, "Senior Sergeant Prokhor Zotov, Comrade Marshal, my dear sis." Whether it was so or not, but Sis was a wonderful man and turned out to be an absolutely indispensable mentor, teacher, babysitter and guardian for me in my new role as a commander in a forward position. He did not have the fear of death that is natural to everyone. He could calmly stand under fire if necessary, and he did it simply, without drawing, without flaunting heroism. To me it seemed something simply supernatural. I still could not get used to the shelling and bowed to every bullet that whistled by. "How is it that you, Prokhor Ignatievich, have no fear of death?" I asked Sestrika once, when he walked, without ducking, along the shallowly dug passage of communication between the two trenches. "What's there to be afraid of her, fool? After all, I shall never meet her, Comrade Major, my dear sister. As long as I am alive, there is no her, and when she comes, I won't see her. It will be too late to meet her. And then, Comrade Major, my dear sister, I believe in God. And don't laugh, I believe in him. When the time comes to die, you'll die anyway, either here from a bullet or in a hut on a stove from a disease." Volkov was right. Our extreme left edge of the defence was the quietest area. We were only occasionally shelled by the Germans, but sometimes their tankers approached us, firing lines from their large-caliber machine guns. Zotov organised a group of bottle hunters and once set a tanker on fire. The tank hunters crawled 50 paces ahead and, camouflaged among the hollows with branches of bushes that covered the entire area, waited for the moment when the position of the tank guaranteed a dead corner. And threw a bottle of gasoline. Only once had such a hunter been wounded. Usually they came back alive and without a scratch. It's not as scary as it looks from the outside, Comrade Major, my dear sister. You just have to know how. And you, Major, don't be afraid. Try it yourself and you'll see. I tried, it didn't work, I missed. I tried again, and only once successfully. I hit the edge of a machine gun turret. Burning gasoline penetrated inside the tank. It twisted in one place, and having snapped in a ravine, flipped on its side. 2 men slipped out of the opened hatch. Their clothes were burning on both of them. They started rolling on the ground, but did not have time to shoot down the fire. They were shot by the soldiers who crawled up. My sister brought me a small Browning, almost a toy, not a weapon, nickel-plated. With tiny cartridges, I took it out of a German's pocket. "It's yours, Comrade Major, my dear sister. Your trophy, keep it as a memento of your first tank." The burnt corpses and the small tank, half destroyed by the explosion of ammunition, remained lying in the ravine in front of the trench. German attacks on our defences became more frequent and more persistent. Almost every time we had dead and wounded, a mine shrapnel killed the battalion political commander Sasha Kormak, a nice young fellow, very passive, calm, reasonable and absolutely not interfering in my actions as a commander of the unit. Every time before another attack, a disgusting feeling of purely physical fear seized me. Ego was body fear. The body is afraid, and does not want to submit to the mind will. It trembles with a small shiver. These few minutes before the beginning of the German attack were always the most difficult for me. I stood at the observation slit, watched the Germans. Preparations through binoculars and thought, well, what's the difference in the end to die in 30 or 40 years in my bed, or now, in this next moment, in this bunker? All the same, death is death, and it may be much more reasonable to accept it now, suddenly in the prime of life, rather than then, from a long debilitating disease or old age. But the body does not understand such reasonable arguments and trembles, and there are some spasms in the stomach. It is about to vomit. My mean shell is afraid. It wants to live, to prolong the pleasure of existence, to breathe air, to admire this boundless blue sky, to eat, to sleep, to love. I knew for sure that as soon as the first tank appeared in the field of vision, this nasty trembling, these spasms would instantly stop, and the frightened body would obey the power of reason, and will it is necessary. A wave of blood will rush to the head, the heart will beat faster. In a few moments I will jump up and shout in a hoarse voice that is not my own attack. Prepare to be repulsed. Bottlemen to your posts. Machine guns, hit the cracks and tracks. Don't waste ammo. Beat them bastards, beat the fascists. What's pushing me? Why beat the bastards? Who am I defending? And who am I forcing others to defend these frightened Asians? I hate what's behind me with all my soul. I hate this damned bunch of sadistic usurpers in the Kremlin. I hate their ruler paranoid Stalin. I hate the whole system of this sub-Soviet life of millions of miserable, intimidated slaves who dare not raise their heads. And I myself am a slave. Why bastards? Is some Fritz or Karl sitting in a tank, who is about to be doused with burning gasoline on my order, to blame? Is he an asshole? Wouldn't he suffer burning alive in his tankette that he was ordered to sit in and drive it into our trenches? Just as I was ordered, risking my own and here these soldiers' lives, to burn both him and his tank. This time the usual attack scenario was slightly changed. The German tankers concentrated their attack on the centre of the defence and on the right flank, but their infantry got quite close and lay down at a distance of 100 paces between the coastal ravines and willow bushes, and from there began to fire. This fire did no damage. The battalion was all the time taking every opportunity to improve its fortifications and burrowed well into the ground. I walked along the whole of my section. At the junction with the other battalion was a well-established machine gun position with a good view. From here I could see that reinforcements were coming up to the entrenched unit. 100 Germans were making short runs to get across the strip of smooth, clear field that was behind the ravines and bushes from which the section was now being shelled. I ordered fire to be concentrated on this reinforcement. "Come on, buddy. Let me try it," I dismissed the machine gunner. Waited a moment, and when there in the field, the Germans rose to another throw, gave a long line. The grey-green figures fell. Some fell, as it was supposed to fall in such a case alive, and some fell, waving their arms and throwing aside the rifle, as it was supposed to fall those who could not get up. How simple. Figures in a shooting gallery. One more time, T-T-T-T-ta-ta-ta. Take your ratchet, my friend, go on. Wait for them to come up, and I didn't finish. The Germans started shelling with mines. 4 mines, one after another, exploded in front of the trenches, raising a heap of earth. I, ducking, ran to my command post, to the telephone, but the next mine exploded, flying over the trench, and scattered on the trench, screeching in the air shrapnel, lumps of earth and stones. I fell to the bottom of the trench from the explosion, and my helmet flew off my head. Several more mines exploded, but fortunately, much farther away, the Germans had made a mistake in their aiming. I got up. Almost against me lay a young Uzbek soldier, Tekiev, whom I knew by name, for Sestrika had often assigned him as a messenger to the headquarters. Tekiev's clean-shaven head was split open. Like a watermelon flashed through my mind, and from the crack in his skull some grey, gelatinous mass was crawling out. Nearby stood a number of similarly dark-headed boys, staring in horror at the murdered man. On instructions from our observation post, the regimental artillery shifted its fire to the Germans against our trench, and they retreated, probably with heavy losses. In general, the Germans chose the place badly for this unnecessary attack by a small number of infantrymen, even without tank cover. At us, on the extreme left flank, became quiet, but in the centre and especially on the right edge of the battle continued. Company commanders came up with casualty reports. 11 killed and 19 wounded. What to do, Comrade Major? 1 fighter is wounded in the arm, in the right palm. A good fighter. I vouch that it is not deliberate, said one of the commanders. And if we send him to the rear, they may shoot him at the outpost. I sat down on a log, which served as a chair, and suddenly felt a rather strong, painful prick in the upper chest on the left side. I unbuttoned my overcoat, and the whole overcoat and undershirt were covered with blood. I think I'm scratched myself, something blood a lot here, I said, suddenly feeling weak. It turned out, indeed, to be only a trifling scratch. A mine fragment, small and sharp as a razor, broke through the side of the overcoat and entered the body a few millimetres. The icon which Zosia had hung round my neck in the quaternary was also wounded. The enamel had cracked and partially chipped away from the image. An orderly was picking out small shards of enamel with tweezers from the washed wound. See, both the Major and God himself were injured by a single shard. A good sign, my grandmother told me. If the cross falls on the wound, you will live long. But a cross and an icon are probably the same thing. The orderly carefully taped the wound. I remembered about the soldier wounded in the arm and called his commander. He told me it's all right. He had a second wound in his thigh through the flesh. He realized that this was his salvation. We cleaned it, bandaged it, even put on a sticker. He'll pass any inspection. Toward evening, Volkov called me. He said that he was quite satisfied with my command. I, frankly speaking, did not expect from you such zeal. During these days 3 tankers destroyed and won. As it was reported to me, you personally, Well done, Major Pali. I've reported it to the division. Now listen up. Though our intelligence is bad, we know that near Bobrisky we have collected a decent number of tanks, not these tankets, but real ones. In the next few days, maybe even hours, the Germans will strike for real. We will not be able to stop them. We have here, on the right bank, very little of everything that is necessary for resistance, especially against a tank attack. When this strike happens, we will probably get the order to withdraw behind the Dnieper. Prepare your battalion for this possibility, but remember, do not withdraw under any circumstances without orders. Is that clear, Comrade Major? Quite clear, Comrade Colonel, I replied. The night passed quietly. At dawn, having given orders to all the commanders in accordance with Volkov's words, I stood in my commanding position and peered into the German line. It was quiet and calm. Only from the north, from the direction of Rogachev, came the sounds of artillery firing. Like before a thunderstorm, I thought, looking through the slit of my command post at the German positions. Yes, dear Major, here's the thing, my dear sister, as Zotov says, in 3 weeks, and a major made, and presented to the award. Perhaps you'll become a general. A Soviet general. From the NKVD solitary confinement on Chernyshevskaya. A counter-revolutionary, a bourgeois nationalist, an anti-Soviet element, and a major decorated. Here, I didn't have time to write a letter to my wife. Where is she? In Moscow or Kiev. It would be good if she stayed in Moscow. The Germans will take Kiev, for sure they will, if they haven't already. I walked the whole length of the station. The soldiers were sitting at the bottom of the trench, frowning and hungry. For 2 days already there had been interruptions in the supply of food to the front line, seeing me off with glances. How many of them would die today? I went back to my post. I wish I could give them a signal, save yourselves, guys, now. Before the hurricane of death falls on you, get away while you are alive. And I won't say anything to them. On the contrary, I'll drive them towards this hurricane. What is it? On July 19th, the German artillery began to speak at once, along the whole front, at exactly 8:30 a.m., and almost immediately they were answered first by the corps, and then by the heavy artillery of the main command, ARGK, from across the Dnieper. The Germans did not shell the front line. Their fire was concentrated on our field artillery positions half a kilometre behind us and on Zhlobin itself. It seemed to me that the intensity of German fire was increasing by the minute, and our artillery was losing momentum, especially the ARGC, and Borisov noticed this. They will soon be silent. They have no shells. The Germans stopped firing, and their attack aviation appeared. The attacking aircraft, almost at strafing flight, attacked along the entire line of defence, starting their attack from our left flank. Since my battalion was at the very slope to the river, we almost never came under machine gun fire from the attacking planes. Only on the very right edge of my section there were hits, but the next battalion already had many dead and wounded. 2 German planes were shot down by our anti-aircraft defence, one over Zhlobin and the other when flying to attack, over the Dnieper. The attack planes were still continuing their work when the observers shouted tanks. Tanks, lots of them. From my seat I saw them too. Lots of them. In my field of vision I counted more than 24 of them. They were real, medium-sized tanks with guns. The direction of their attack was towards the central part of the defence. Well, that's the end. They will crush us, I thought, but did not have time to even continue my thought, as the order was received on the phone. Pali, reel in the rods. Quickly. We are retreating behind the Dnieper. Roll down to the river. The 1st Battalion is taking your place. Quickly, along the river to the bridges. I barely had time to give the command, as the men of the 1st Battalion had already started to take our places. Sergeant Nurse and I and a few other men were the last to roll down to the river. Down by the water there were many bushes of crabapple and tall reeds. It was difficult to get through this thicket, and we lost a lot of time while we jumped out to the water. It was at least half a kilometre to the bridges in Zhlobin. I saw from afar that there was a traffic jam ahead, on the narrow sandy path along the water. Overtaking the soldiers, I ran to the place. A young lieutenant, the commander of the outpost, with a face twisted with anger, waving his arms and swearing, was standing in front of Borisov, and behind him on the sand sat about 30 soldiers surrounded by men from Borisov's guard unit. All of them, including the swearing lieutenant, were disarmed. Seeing me, the lieutenant began to shout, "Comrade Major, I am the commander of the outpost. The order is not to let anyone through to the rear, and he. This is treason, he should be shot." I demanded. It turned out that this kid didn't know yet that all the units were leaving Zhlobin and withdrawing behind the Dnieper. When our soldiers wanted to go to the bridges, he put out his machine gunners and ordered everyone to return to their positions. Borisov, who had arrived, managed to disarm these Meklis's men. When, at last, I convinced him that he too should run to the crossing as soon as possible, and especially when he saw that ahead of him people, many hundreds of them, were pouring down from the high bank like peas from a dustpan. In complete panic, he also rushed to run with his soldiers, forgetting to take his weapons. It was already a panic flight. No units, no soldiers, no commanders, only a crowd of fleeing people, gripped by fear and trying to save their lives. There was no command, no discipline, no organized withdrawal, and in such a state of the crowd nothing could be done. Those who had rolled down to the river rushed along the bank. Some rushed to the bridges, others, for some reason, ran towards my battalion, which was still in relative order, and at last a good number, having thrown their things and arms behind them, jumped into the water and swam to the other bank, being carried obliquely by the current of the river. In the mass of fleeing I lost all my men and commanders. With me were only Sergeant Nurse, Borisov and a dozen more soldiers from the guard platoon. In one place ahead the cliff came very close to the water, leaving a narrow strip of wet sand. There the crowd of those heading for the bridges was growing and slowly seeped through the narrow place, like through the neck of a bottle. More and more people rushed off the cliff, and the crowd at the bottleneck on the bank ahead continued to grow. We had no other way out. We all took off our shoes, threw everything that could hinder us, including weapons, and threw ourselves into the river. As we held on together, helping each other, the current began to carry us down the Dnieper. I began to choke. I had neither training nor sufficient strength to swim such long distances. Zotov fumbled for a shoal with his feet, and we were all able to take a break. For me it was absolutely necessary. There were many planks, logs and corpses floating down the river. The current brought the corpse of a German soldier toward us. Pushing him away, Sis said, "And how did you get into the wrong company?" "Wrong, my friend. At the place where we started our swimming there were already Germans both on the cliffs above and below, near the water. From the place of our rest we could clearly see crowds of Red Army soldiers standing with their hands raised up. Right against our shoal on the shore appeared German automobiles, and soldiers jumped out of them. The distance was not more than 150 meters. They immediately saw our group, which was closely packed on the bank, and began to fire at us with automatic rifles. We rushed in different directions, diving into the depths. I took in a little air and, after staying underwater for a few seconds, surfaced, took in a lungful of air, and dived again. Bullets were chomping around in the water. I dived out again, the Germans were shooting somewhere to the side, and Sis dived out next to me. "Cling to the log, Major, my dear Sis," he shouted, pushing a decent-sized log toward me. The German soldiers again let a few lines fly in our direction. The log hit me in the shoulder, I ducked under it, and finding myself on the other side of it, looked back. Sis was gone, only a small bloodstain blurred on the surface. Prokhor Ignatievich is dead. My dear sister, I thought. At last I have met my death, a strong double explosion sounded. Looking back at the sound, I saw that both bridges, the railroad and the other, flew into the air. From a distance it seemed to me that among the flying debris, tumbling in the air, flew and human figures. When I reached the shore, wading chest deep in water through a marshy meadow, I met Borisov and 2 soldiers. The others had either drowned or been shot by the Germans, or perhaps lost somewhere in the swamp. In the afternoon, with wounded legs, barely alive from fatigue, we reached the road. Here we organized assembly points, first medical aid and food distribution. By nightfall we joined our 114th Regiment, or rather that crowd of tired, dirty, exhausted soldiers that remained of the regiment. Colonel Volkov and his Chief of Staff Dubrovsky had been killed. My Vice Chief Major Titov was appointed acting regimental commander, who, he said, never made it to Rogachev. The Germans were already there. A group of commanders sat around the fire, dried their uniforms, cleaned weapons, who had them left, drank hot tea with a strong admixture of vodka, and swore. Defeat. Total annihilation. No supplies. My fighters had 15 rounds of ammunition when the attack began, and the machine gunners had 2 ribbons each. Konkor Petrovsky shot himself. The bridges were blown up when we still had men on them. There were 20,000 left on the other side of the river. Why the devil was it necessary to organize this defense, if the combat support was only for an hour and a half? No artillery or air support. The whole corps was simply thrown into the jaws of the Germans. And all this was interspersed with profanity addressed to the army command, the centre, and even the top commanders themselves. Political instructors kept silent, and the more the commanders drank hot tea with admixture, the louder was the swearing. The Germans did not force the Dnieper. There was a relative calm. Sometimes artillery fire started, sometimes German airplanes appeared, shot, and were driven away by anti-aircraft guns. There were only about 200 men left in my battalion. How many were killed? How many were captured? How many ran away no one knew. From Zhlobin all the way to Gomel there was work to restore, at least to some extent, the combat effectiveness of the defeated units. I went from the battalion location to Chetvernya a couple of times, went to Tarasenko's house. Everything was the same there, as if the war had never happened. The whole family was working in the vegetable garden, preparing food for the winter. Klava left and took Zosia with her, and the house was empty, with boarded-up windows. Once I went to the village council to listen to the radio and came across a group of green deserters, as they were called. They were a dangerous people. They abandoned their units and went on the rampage in the forests, or hid in villages waiting for the Germans to come, and then they came out with their hands up and surrendered. If they were caught by order of the command, they were shot on the spot, so knowing their fate, they, these Greens, desperately resisted arrest and killed anyone who discovered them, or who could denounce them. I, walking along a small ravine, noticed some soldiers in the bushes. Stopping, I asked them what unit they were and what they were doing here. Suddenly I was surrounded by them, about 10 men. "What unit are we?" "We forgot, Comrade Commander. We are tired, so we decided to rest," said one of them, apparently playing the role of a leader. I offered them to come with me and temporarily join my unit. I realized who I was dealing with and decided to be a little snivelling. My position was very dangerous. "Much obliged, Comrade Major," replied the ringleader mockingly. "Only this does not suit us. We have organized our own part, and I am the most important chief," he went round me, and under the laughter of his comrades stood in front of me in front, bulged his eyes, and barked, "I dare ask you, Comrade Major, roll to. We haven't seen you, and you haven't seen us. Do you understand me? And say thank you that we let you go in one piece, and not with a beaten face, march back to your unit." To my shame, I quickly marched back to my unit, and when I got there, I didn't say a word to anyone. I had nothing to brag about, and I got cold feet. In the evening of July 25th, I sat in my tent and wanted to finish the letter to my wife, which I had not finished several times already. And again, I didn't finish it. It was impossible to write frankly about what was going on around me, and it was shameful to write something patriotic in front of my wife, as she would have felt the falsity at once. All that day from the Dnieper side there was a lively firefight. The regimental headquarters said that, by all accounts, the Germans are preparing to force the Dnieper. "They will blow us to smithereens. No ammunition we have, no shells for artillery, no fuel for tankers," told me Titov. At dawn the next day I was awakened by the duty officer on duty in the unit, and handed me a copy of the order from the division. The order stated that I was to arrive in the village of Skepnia Lugovaya with 2 trucks by 12:30 to receive combat engineering equipment for the regiment. Skepnia Lugovaya was located 20 kilometers south of Chetvernya, almost on the very bank of the Dnieper. From the side of the river was heard quite intense firing, and I decided to reduce the risk to take a roundabout way through another village, Skepnia Lesovaya, located in the forest 10 kilometers from Skepnia Lugovaya. But Major Titov forbade me to go that way. "Nonsense, why are you panicking? There in Lugovaya is the headquarters of the 215th Division. to which we now belong, and if the headquarters is there, it is safe to go there. Don't waste your time and fuel. Go straight through Chetvania." Taking Borisov, Shmatko and 2 other junior commanders with me, I left after 8 o'clock. Chetvania stretched along the meadows for 2 kilometers, one street, and when we began to descend from the forest, where our regiment was located, down through the fields of ripe fat, to the village, it became clear that in the meadows, or on the bank of the Dnieper, there was a battle. Near the village council, I stopped and decided to find out the situation, what was going on. Here in the village council was the centre of the district organisation of fighters, a paramilitary group mainly consisting of party and Komsomol members who had special tasks to prepare the district if the Red Army would leave it mining bridges, destroying collective farm equipment and stock, stealing cattle and horses to the rear, and even burning crops. I knew about this when we were digging the ground here on the orders of the UPU. In the village council I did not find a single person. Everything was empty. Only I had time to go outside, when shells began to burst around. One shell exploded right in front of the entrance to the village council, knocking over a plaster bust of the great leader Comrade Stalin, which was scattered with small shards. The Germans moved the fire further and shelled the sawmill behind the village, and I returned to my cars. The village was completely deserted, but in the meadows the firing was growing more and more intense. After driving along the street for half a kilometre, we saw that ahead, in groups and alone, Red Army soldiers were running across the street, hiding in the fields, bushes and ravines behind the village. One group surrounded our vehicles. A senior sergeant, without a helmet, with a machine gun in his hand, came up to me. "Where the hell are you going?" "The Germans are there. They're squeezing without mercy. Turn back, Major." The situation was the stupidest. To turn back a clear disobedience of the order, to continue driving on the destination you can really get right on the Germans. I nevertheless decided to drive still forward along the road to the nearest forest, beyond which was Stepnaya Lugovaya. In this forest we were making anti-tank barrages, and I knew the terrain pretty well. We stopped at the outskirts of the village, under thick trees. Here, not far away in a side street, was Tarasenko's house. While we were standing and discussing what we should do, an old woman looked out from behind the fence and at our request brought us a jug of milk and warm tortillas. I asked her what was going on with Tarasenko. She told us a sad story. Tarasenko himself had not returned from Zhlobin, and when Zhlobin was in the hands of the Germans, Tarasenko's aunt went to find out what had happened to him. She reached a half station against Zhlobin, and there she came under fire. She was seriously wounded, and when she was brought to the hospital in Chetvania, she died. Shura took her younger sisters and brothers, all 5 of them, loaded some things on a cart and left the day before yesterday to her relatives in Krychov. And people say that Krychov has already been overrun by them. Where did she go at this hour? She would have stayed at home with her family. Indeed, it was terrible to even think what situation a young girl of 19, with 5 children, who found herself among the retreating and advancing soldiers, was in. Across the road, our units were still retreating. Shooting in the meadows was almost completely silenced. Only occasionally came individual shots or short machine gun bursts. Above us flew a formation of German fighters, and we again began to discuss what we should do. The whole road from Chetvania to the forest was lined with large trees. Having cut a lot of branches and camouflaged the cars with them, we decided to drive to the forest, and there, if anything, to turn along the country forest road towards Stepnaya Lesovaya. We drove cautiously, watching the air. No soldiers, no shooting. It was completely quiet here, but from the north came a strong artillery cannonade. At the edge of the forest was an infantry unit, and quite large, not less than a company, if not more. The captain came up and asked who we were, where we were going, and why we were going. I showed him a copy of the order. When I asked him if it was possible to go to Stepnaya Lugovaya, he answered very calmly and confidently, "Now it is possible." It was their stray detachment that broke through the Dnieper. All of them were killed, and in Stepnaya is the headquarters of our 215th. It's strong there now. The captain smelled strongly of alcohol. Another car approached, a passenger car, with 5 young lieutenants. They were on their way to Gomel, to the headquarters of the 21st Army, and asked permission to join our column there near Chetveny. We came under such fire that we barely got away. "Where are the Germans now?" asked one of them. "There are none on this side of the Dnieper. Only corpses lying in the meadows," said the captain. Only near the edge of the forest were Red Army soldiers visible. Further on the forest was completely deserted and quiet. As we were leaving the woods, a passenger car with the lieutenants overtook us and quickly began to move forward along the road. Suddenly it swerved several times, was enveloped in a cloud of dust and smoke, and exploded. Our chauffeur screamed, let the steering wheel out of his hands and fell headfirst. The car skidded down the road, rolled into a ditch, and hit a pile of rubble. The cab windows shattered, and an explosion sounded in the back of the truck. We came under direct fire. I jumped out of the cab and fell on my outstretched arms into the ditch, stunned by the explosion and the fall, experiencing severe pain in my arm and leg. Quite instinctively, I tried to unbuckle my holster and pull out my Tula pistol with a single thought in my head: Germans. Germans. Right on top of them. I didn't have time to pull the weapon out. Halt, halt, handy hook. Several soldiers piled on top of me and, grabbing me by the arms, dragged me out onto the road. On both sides of the road, in a wide arc across the fields, was a thin chain of Germans. A young German officer stood over me and looked at me with a smile, lying in the dust on the road at his feet. I, standing up, looked back. The passenger car with the lieutenants was burning in front, and behind, closer to the forest, my second Zeiss was burning. There is, of course, a huge difference between the feelings of a man captured in a large mass, when hundreds and thousands of soldiers, in a hopeless situation, throw down their weapons and raise their hands, and the feelings of one man who suddenly found himself face to face with a group of enemies, pointing at him the muzzles of their automatic rifles. One wrong step, gesture, or the slightest mistake, and instead of a living prisoner on the ground, would be a corpse with a shot through the head. I realized this at once. The soldier's machine gun was almost touching my head. In any position, the transition of a soldier to the position of a prisoner is accompanied by a psychological shock. But this shock is much more tangible and painful for a loner than for one of many. The soldiers stripped me of my gun plate and gun belt, then they gutted all my belongings from my pockets. The officer asked something, but my knowledge of German was more than limited, and I only kept saying Deutsche nicht verstehen, nicht sprechen. As he sorted through my things, the officer shook his head and smilingly said, "Das ist schade, sehr schade." He put a cigarette case, a lighter, a comb and a handkerchief in my cap, and the rest he poured into a canvas soldier's bag. He gave the cap to me and the bag to the soldier. Then he took my clipboard and showed it to me. The clipboard was shot through with a bullet. Only at that moment I realized that I was wounded, and that the severe pain in my leg was not from the impact of the fall, but from the pain of the wound. My leg was completely numb, and my boot was wet and warm. The officer said something, the soldiers laughed, and I suddenly felt faint and lay down right in the road dust. The officer gave a command and followed the retreating chain, and the soldiers followed him. It seemed to me that they had left me on the road. One of the soldiers suddenly turned sharply towards me and pointed his machine gun at me. I rushed to the side, and from a sharp pain in my leg, or maybe from fright, I lost consciousness. Obviously, it was only one moment. When I woke up, I saw that the soldiers were laughing, and the one who pointed his weapon at me waved goodbye. Two soldiers remained with me. They were laughing and trying to say something to me, but I continued to lie there and did not understand anything. All these soldiers, like their commander, were tall, healthy young blondes, with the sleeves of their uniforms rolled up to the elbow, with round steel helmets clipped to their belts. On the sleeves and on the helmets were the insignia SS 310. My escorts kept murmuring something. Then, losing patience, one of them picked me up under my arms and set me on my feet, but as soon as he stopped holding me, I settled back on the road, my leg completely swollen, and the pain in my wound becoming completely unbearable. What about the others, I thought. Remembering my companions, mein Soldaten, I asked Ali Tot. Alles kaputt, said one of the soldiers as if apologizing, handing another his automatic rifle. He bent towards me, and, taking my hand, deftly threw my body over his back and walked along the side of the road. He carried my 85 pounds easily and freely, talking to his comrade. As the soldiers passed the still smouldering and smoking car, I saw the charred corpses of the lieutenants. Towards them, cars with soldiers were coming along the road. They were shouting something. Probably they won't kill me, I thought. They can kill me here on the road. There's no point in labouring and dragging me somewhere. They brought me to the field sanitary station. At the very edge of the village, soldiers were putting up a big tent and unpacking boxes. A white flag with a red cross was hanging on the mast. Under a small tarpaulin awning stood a number of camp beds. I was placed on one of them. There were no other wounded. A man in a white coat came over, an orderly by the look of him. He cut my pants and cleaned my wound, then shouted something. 2 more men came out of a large truck, also marked with a red cross. They gave me a shot in the thigh and pulled the bullet out. I don't know what the shot was for. I lost consciousness from the sharp pain. Then they put a yellow smelly ointment on the wound and bandaged my leg. From the words of my operators, and from their smiles and gestures, I realized that the wound was nothing. And indeed, in a few minutes the pain began to subside and sensitivity returned to the whole leg. But that was not all. They sat me down and began to take off my overalls. When I sat down, I felt something hard, and then I remembered. In the back pocket of my pants I had that small nickel-plated Browning, which Sergeant Nurse had taken out of the pocket of the killed German when I lit my first and last tank on fire with a bottle of gasoline and presented it to me as a trophy. The soldiers searching me on the front line were not attentive enough. I decided that there was no point in keeping this weapon with me. They would find it anyway, and then it would be worse, and as a weapon, a pistol of this caliber had no value. I took the nickel-plated toy out of my pocket. The effect was unexpected, comical, and almost cost me my life. All 3 men in white coats, ridiculously spreading their legs and arms, bounced backwards from me. One of them, the one who took out the bullet, shouted something hoarsely. I saw 2 soldiers running toward me with machine guns. One moment and I would have been killed. Terrified, I threw aside my Browning and wailed hoarsely too, I vergessen. They're vergessen, you know. Just vergessen, the Germans began to laugh deafeningly. Everything calmed down, and the Germans, patting me on the shoulder, continued to talk among themselves with laughter. I also had a small wound on my back, from a fragment of a hand grenade that had been thrown into the back of my Z's and killed both junior commanders who were there. When the bandaging was over, I was left to sit on the bunk. A cup of hot, bitter coffee and a few pieces of cookies were brought. I was left alone. German troops were moving along the road in an endless avalanche. Tanks, tankets, trucks of all sizes, artillery, squads of infantry, motorcyclists, bicyclists, and trucks again. The soldiers were young, healthy, cheerful, with songs, jokes, laughter, all well-dressed, all with automatic weapons. They went as if to a merry picnic or to a sporting event. Far away, probably 30 kilometres away, artillery firing was heard, and planes with black crosses on their wings often flew through the air. I sat on a bunk under the awning and thought what a contrast. Ours ragged, tired, dirty, hungry, poorly armed. And these fascists marching as if on parade. How far will they go? If to Moscow. That's the end of the Bolsheviks. And then what? What new things will arise if the Soviet system collapses? And why didn't they kill me? They dressed my wounds, fed me. What do they need me for? And why am I separated from the other prisoners? A group of soldiers came closer, and I could hear them joking in broken Russian Polish with the peasants and girls in the crowd. The peasants stood on either side of the street and watched with curiosity, as I did, this powerful stream of German troops. Again and again I came back to the thought of what had happened. 5 weeks I fought, and here I was wounded and a prisoner of war. All this fleeing through Belarus, building field fortifications no one needed, defending Zhlobin, commanding a battalion of Lopatniki, at the last minute turned, like myself, into frontline fighters. All this led to nothing. I'm alone, wounded and a prisoner. Sitting in the trenches near Zhlobin, we would have been crushed by German tanks. Without the order to retreat, I myself would have been left to die under their tracks, and I would have made all my subordinates die. Why? My thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of two German officers who drove up in a small automobile. Having found out that I did not understand anything in German, they brought a young sergeant who spoke a cool mixture of Polish, Serbian and Ukrainian. We made some sort of arrangement. I was told that, according to the order, all Soviet commanders of the rank of major and above, that is, the so-called senior command staff, who had been captured in this area, must be interrogated at the division headquarters, so I was to be brought to this headquarters as soon as possible. And until then I would sit here, on this bunk, under a tarpaulin awning. The officers left, and I was left waiting again. It was already the 4th hour. They brought me some food, a pot of thick, good-smelling soup and a large piece of bread, coffee again, cookies, and a pack of cigarettes. On the road through Sepnia the German units kept advancing. The population stood on the sides of the road, looking curiously at the enemy conquerors, gangs of fascists, as they were called yesterday by the Soviet radio announcers. In the opposite direction, toward the Dnieper, crawled a large column of prisoners, probably up to 1,000 people, guarded by a dozen German soldiers. Only after 5 o'clock in the afternoon, a large headquarters-type car arrived and I was taken to the division headquarters. But on this day they never delivered me. With difficulty we moved to the other side of the Dnieper on a small motor pontoon. The pontoon bridge across the Dnieper was completely full of passing troops. It got dark, and the non-commissioned officer escorting me spent the night in the location of the artillery unit, waiting to cross to the left bank. I was put to sleep in a large room of some collective farm shed, packed with artillerymen. An orderly came and bandaged me, and instead of my cut pants I was given a pair of German pants, matching my height and almost new. I was fed for the night with what all the soldiers ate. I did not arouse much attention to my person in this mass of soldiers. Some of the soldiers wanted to talk to me, but the language barrier was insurmountable, and I was left alone. The excitement of the day's experiences threw me down on the straw, and I fell asleep like a dead man. My non-commissioned officer woke me early, just after 5 o'clock. In a small car we drove up in half an hour to the location of the headquarters of the 310th SS Division. The headquarters was located in several enormous-sized trailers, arranged like mobile homes standing on the outskirts of a small village. I was placed not far from a large-caliber machine gun. There were several of them around, under the supervision of two soldiers on duty at the machine gun. I was ordered to wait. It was not until 7 o'clock that a dapper young non-commissioned officer came up and ordered me to follow him. At one of the headquarters motorhouses stood a table and a few chairs. With a gesture, the non-commissioner ordered me to sit down at the table. When I sat down, the non-commissioned officer took away my crutch, given to me yesterday at the sanitary station, and laid it far away. In about 10 minutes, a tall, grey-haired officer, with the epaulets of a lieutenant colonel, came out of the house. After exchanging a few words with the non-commissioned officer, he approached me. "Hello, Major," he said in Russian, and extended his hand to me. He sat down opposite me at the table and briefly explained to me why I was here and what he wanted from me. First, he wanted to talk on various topics and ask a number of informal questions of interest to the German command in general, and him personally in particular, and then to conduct a formal interrogation with filling out the appropriate documents. The lieutenant colonel's name was Karl Heinrichovich Brutner. Before the beginning of the unofficial part came a soldier and brought breakfast to the lieutenant colonel and me. Such a breakfast I had not had since the beginning of the war. First, Brutner, obviously in order to arouse my confidence, told me about himself. He was born and raised in Russia and graduated from gymnasium in Moscow, where his father was for many years a representative of some German firm. The whole Brutner family had returned to Germany just before the outbreak of war in 1914. He taught history at the university, dealing with the Slavs in general and Russia in particular. According to him, he was seconded to this section of the front with the task of gathering as much material as possible about the present state of the Soviet Union, mainly in the field of the mood of the population, the soldiers and commanders of the Red Army, their attitude toward the government, their political views, psychology, etc. Then he began to question me about who I was, what I had been doing, and what my political beliefs were. From the outside, the picture was, of course, very strange. Two people were sitting at the same table, having breakfast: a German lieutenant colonel, clean, well-shaven and smelling of cologne, and a Soviet major in a torn and blood-stained uniform, German soldier's pants, unshaven, dirty and tired. I answered the lieutenant colonel's questions sparingly, cautiously, not really understanding what this strange conversation was leading to and what this German professor in military uniform wanted from me. But the professor was not embarrassed by this, and from time to time, between questions, he made whole speeches, apparently being carried away by his own words. We need information, knowledge and understanding of the situation, of the conditions in which you lived, understanding of the thoughts and moods of the mass of ordinary people, the military, intellectuals, scientists, of your entire country, which very soon will come under our control, and we will be responsible for the complete restructuring of your entire society, the state system, and the entire life of the millions inhabiting the former Soviet Union. When I remarked that perhaps it was a little early to say former, about the Soviet Union stretching to the Pacific Ocean, sitting on the right bank of the Dnieper, Bruckner objected, "No, it is not early. For you personally, the war is already over. Now, in a quiet and safe place, you will wait for its general end, and then in 3 or 4 months, at most 6 months, you will return to your family, to your business. All the information we are collecting now, we need it not for military operations, not to ensure victory we have already won, but for the post-war period. A period not of destruction, but of creation." He talked, and I wanted to sleep. A soldier brought a bag with my belongings, taken from me yesterday at the moment of my capture. Bruckner scrutinized everything, including the documents and the little book of records I had systematically kept for myself since the early days of my military career, and the letter to my wife that I had not had time to send. "You will have all these things when you arrive at the camp while we detain them," he said, putting everything back into the bag. "You must understand what I am saying. We Germans are not enemies to the Russian people or any other people in the Soviet Union. I love the Russian people, I love Russia, it is my homeland too. We want to free all of Europe and including Russia from the power of a bunch of internationalist communists, from the corrosive, corrupting influence of the Jewish communist ideology. You, Russian intellectuals, must help us in this. The entire Russian emigre community has already joined us." Finally, the professor lieutenant colonel substituted that I was physically unable to continue the interesting conversation. My leg was aching. Morally, I was utterly exhausted and intolerably sleepy, all right. He said, "Let us proceed to the official part." He called for a soldier and ordered something to him. In a minute, a dapper-looking non-commissioned officer appeared with a typewriter. The interrogation began. Bruckner asked questions. My answers were translated into German, and the non-commissioner tapped them out on the typewriter on a special form. Name, surname, year of birth, place of birth, nationality, religion, education, specialty, 35 questions or more. I could hardly comprehend the questions and answered them. Bruckner apparently lost all interest in me. As soon as my answer to the last question was typed, he rose and, without giving me his hand, said dryly, "This is the end of it. I regret that you either did not understand what I told you or did not want to understand. I advise you to familiarize yourself more closely with the ideas of National Socialism in the camp. For all your future life it will be very important. Goodbye." Bruckner left. The soldier gave me my crutch and took me again under the guard of the machine gunners. From afar I saw that a car had pulled up and 2 Soviet commanders came out of it, and they were seated at the same table where I had been sitting for an hour and a half. I, lying under a tree on the grass, fell asleep. Already at noon I was awakened by a young, almost boyish, non-commissioned officer. In very clear, with a slight accent, Russian, he said, "Mr. Major, you will be taken to the POW assembly point. It is not far from here, and then you will be taken to Germany to the central camp for officers." When I asked him why he spoke Russian so well, the young man replied, "I am from a Russian family. Although I was born in Germany, I work in Prof." Bruckner's group with him came some medic in a white coat and with a suitcase in his hands. He checked the condition of my wound and, bandaging it, said something approvingly. "The doctor says your wound is in excellent condition and will heal in a few days." The young man was discreetly taciturn. Despite the fact that the assembly camp was not far from here, I didn't get there until the evening. We left the location of the headquarters about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. During that time, 7 or 8 other Soviet commanders visited Brutna, but they were brought and taken away in cars, and I saw them only from a distance. Finally, they put me in a car, but after 10 kilometers the tire on one wheel burst. There was no spare. An infantry unit was resting not far away. The driver went there for help, and I stayed with the escort. Nobody was in a hurry. Everything was done slowly, with conversations, with breaks for food, with smoke breaks. I was given a pot of soldiers' soup and a lot of bread. Soldiers of the resting unit came in groups and alone, looked at me like a wild animal in a cage, tried to say something. When they asked me something, I kept saying nicht verstehen, nicht sprechen. No acquaintance was made. One of the soldiers wanted to remove from my buttonhole sleeper. I removed his hand, and he obediently removed it, even apologized. The tire was finally put in order, and we drove on. In the dense twilight, we approached a large barn at the edge of the village. 2 stocky German soldiers opened the door and roughly pushed me inside. One of them greeted me in Russian with a volley of obscene language. That was the end of my privileged position as a senior Red Army commander, and I fell into the general stream of people outside the law. Many times later I tried to understand why Professor Lieutenant Colonel Brutner had so distorted the whole picture. Was he himself completely uninformed about what the German command was preparing for us, Soviet prisoners of war, or was it a deliberate lie? The calm and safe place turned out to be both very turbulent and unsafe, and for the great majority of the Soviet army personnel it became a grave.